I got absolutely eviscerated in the comments section in this video right here where I speculated that there was more than one suspect when this crime was committed, because the timeline doesn't add up if there was only one person. A lot of people had said, well, Dylan says she only saw or heard one person, so there's no way any of this is possible. But as it turns out, within this story, Dylan's the only one that was telling the truth, and everyone else was bending their story around a fabrication. All that being said, everything's alleged. Welcome to the point. Let's get to it.
This probable cause affidavit talks about
Got a lot of problems with this story after she
an
reads
interview
this.
they had where the person that was interviewed said that she heard things and saw things within her house. But what is written in the probable cause affidavit is seriously lacking in detail. It's wrong and it's false in many places. The way the affidavit reads, it says this person stated she went to sleep on the second floor. She was awoken at 4 by what she stated sounded like one of the victims playing with the dog, which was on the 3rd floor.
And while she's talking about the dog, we're not going to harp on it too much. What came out in this hearing is Murphy was found in a bedroom, the door was open, he wasn't in a cage, and he hadn't tracked any DNA through the home. It almost seems as if Murphy stayed in the room that somebody told him to stay in. So did somebody tell Murphy sit or stay and then commit this crime? It is highly odd to me that within this story, that dog did not go anywhere besides that one particular room. I'm not quite sure how this ties into the rest of the story, but there's more.
A short time later, she thought she heard one of the victims say something. That caveat, she thought she heard, is a problem. That's not at all what was said. This person was interviewed shortly after 911 was called in the afternoon of November 13th. 2022, and she was sure. I'm at Defendant's Exhibit 8A, page 281, lines 4 through 10, when this witness was sure that she heard this particular victim go up the stairs, and then come running back down the stairs. That is not what's contained in this affidavit at all. That is repeated during this same interview a couple of different times at page 287. It's also repeated in a subsequent interview that same day. This is Defendant's Exhibit 8B. That's at page 313. And again at 320.
So who's running up and down the stairs? That's the question. It said multiple times.
One more of these where this is repeated. It's repeated again in D8C as well. That is important because that's misleading to the judge. That waters down what was said, and that matters in the probable cause affidavit, because the officers, when they wrote this, knew that wasn't the case. They knew this particular person that DM said was upright and running down the stairs, that's not what happened.
So there you go. What's your explanation for that? Let's keep this stuff in mind. At the time Dylan is saying she's hearing somebody play with Murphy, Bryan's still technically in the vehicle. He hasn't parked, if he parked at the home. And if you're going to make the statement that, well, this is clearly Xana during the time of the attack, or Ethan, and they had ran up and down the stairs trying to help whatever was going on, then you have to ask yourself, well, why wasn't there anybody yelling to call 911? Why wasn't there any screaming? Why wasn't there any alert? Law enforcement said those two individuals were passed in the bedroom. And it's sad and it's tragic, but what's also tragic is we can't get the truth of this story. Everything that law enforcement is saying as it's lining up to me doesn't make sense. And Dylan's own words validate my concerns with this investigation. Now, as always, I'm open to being wrong, but I feel like this is a huge issue right here. And the prosecution in the back and forth of this thing likes to tag on a lot of these issues. They like to discredit a lot of what the defense is saying, and that's fine. They're biased and they're supposed to be biased. This is their case. But there's a lot that Ann Taylor says within this particular piece of the argument they don't even want to touch. In fact, they don't want to go near it. And there's a piece of me that thinks they hope everybody at trial forgets all this stuff that's going to come out at trial about Dylan Mortensen's statements.
That person was in the bed and never left the bed. So the officers water that down because they know that fact is wrong, but they don't tell the magistrate that. They also don't tell the magistrate that this witness has claimed memory problems, that this witness has claimed that she's not sure what she heard or saw was real or whether it was at a dream, and that is contained in defendant's 8C, and that's going to be beginning at page 396, 398, 399, 403. There's further statements from that.
And that's a huge issue for the state. This is their key witness. But the fact that she was out and she was partying isn't a shocker to all of us who are trying to remain objective, who are just trying to simply understand what happened that night. The state goes on to say, well, she might have said it was a dream, but obviously it wasn't a dream because we have a quadruple passing. That's not the point. What she's saying is this memory is very fuzzy. I can't necessarily say what I saw or didn't see. She's not saying it's actually a dream. That's kind of an overgeneralized statement if you ask me.
Witness in that police interview that said that she had too much to drink and couldn't remember. None of that is given to the magistrate. That is information that's withheld. That's credibility of the person telling law enforcement these things, and the magistrate had a right to know that whatever is laid out in here isn't exactly the way it was. That person had credibility issues, and she said things that were just absolutely untrue.
Or they were true, they just don't make sense with the timeline as it stands. She believes somebody was running up and down the stairs at a time when everybody was in their bedroom. Also at a time when Bryan was in his vehicle. I mean, we got a ton of questions here. Who was running up and down those stairs? And before you say that's absolutely ridiculous and a complete fabrication, listen to what she says later on, and we'll get to that in just a second.
Couldn't have been true. Law enforcement knew that. That was intentionally withheld from the magistrate. That matters when we're talking about credibility and sets this whole thing into motion.
Now they go on to talk about the vehicle and the issues with the vehicle, and if we're being fair and being objective when listening to this hearing, I think we can all agree both the state and the defense raise valid points. The big problem for the state in this story is they have all this surveillance footage and can tell absolutely every single piece of movement Bryan made before and during and after these attacks, except they can't show any footage of him leaving this particular crime scene. In fact, it just seems as if, in terms of video surveillance footage, all this stuff disappears. They have no idea where he went. Obviously, the town is heavily surveilled. Obviously, there are security cameras and ring cameras all over the place. Where did his vehicle go? And one of the issues for the defense is they're going to have to prove that this video surveillance footage is incorrect. In fact, they make a statement that at one point in time, his vehicle's going in an opposite direction, and they try to say that proves Bryan wasn't in that area. But the state raised a valid point. This particular piece of the footage is over an hour before the incident started. It's completely feasible a car could turn around, and that's true. So in terms of what's legitimate with the vehicle, both sides have a lot of work to do if they're going to convince anybody for sure of one particular story. But let's dive back into the potential of two suspects, because this is very important. As it stands right now, the DNA on the sheath is presumed to be skin cells. And we knew that there was unidentified male DNA found in the home and one found outside the home. What we didn't know is what type of DNA it was. And that's important when you're talking about a quadruple passing. But this is what is said specifically.
If the magistrate judge had been told there's unknown male B in the house attached to the handrail, that might have made more of a difference to her.
Absolutely.
Maybe a sheath that can be carried to the house and in the house that's not the same, maybe that matters. And then maybe the car being completely empty of any DNA connection, maybe that matters a little bit more.
Well, I'm just not sure why it matters for probable cause, but I think we're talking over each other, so I'll let you just go on.
Okay. I don't think probable cause is in a vacuum. I think probable cause isn't one thing. I hope it's not one thing. I hope there has to be a little bit more than one thing, especially when you've got another thing that's the same as the one thing.
And here we go with this stuff. What is more valid here? Law enforcement is very focused on the DNA left on the sheath because they believe that ties to the weapon used in a quadruple passing. But if that DNA is skin cells, how legitimate is that? They find bodily fluid on the handrails of an unknown source, and they don't jump through hoops to figure out who that DNA belongs to. That doesn't necessarily line up. They need to prove this stuff beyond a reasonable doubt. And have an unknown male DNA found in the home that isn't skin cells is a huge piece of reasonable doubt for me, especially considering what type of DNA it is. It isn't skin cells, people. It isn't hair, it isn't spit. It's the type of DNA that you would leave behind at a crime scene when you're in a struggle. But in terms of this unknown male DNA, there's more. Listen to this.
Well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because you brought up DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Kohberger? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved if you assume that that was related to the victims and not some earlier event in the house.
Now, a lot of people are giving Judge Hippler crap. They're saying he's trying to throw Ann Taylor off of her particular argument and get her discombobulated or whatever, and that he's heavily favoring the state. I don't necessarily see it that way. This is a legitimate question because he's trying to figure out what needs to be thrown out and are these warrants illegitimate. So he's got to ask these questions. And in terms of his question, does it make more sense that Bryan was, say, the getaway driver? That was at one point very early on a theory. Because that theory would, to a degree, explain the lack of DNA found at the home, in the car, and in the crime scene, while possibly explaining why his vehicle was there if it was there, and why his DNA was on the sheath if that was actually his DNA in his sheath. But people were saying Ann Taylor stepping on her words. She had a really hard time getting through this particular hearing. Listen to the pivot she makes and the explanation she makes that justifies her position as to why all this stuff is nonsense.
If what the court is saying is exactly why the magistrate needed to know that. Is there another explanation here?
Absolutely.
I've got this sheath, but there are all these other things that if I know about them, matter. What's the other explanation? What's going on with this investigation?
Yeah, there's two suspects.
What's happening here? That's exactly the point, Your Honor. What other explanation is there? The magistrate wasn't given a chance to ask that. She wasn't given a chance to ask that when she wasn't told about unknown male B on the handrail. She wasn't given a chance to ask about that when she wasn't told about unknown male D on a glove right outside the residence.
How is that not a huge issue within the mainstream media? You have unknown male DNA found inside the home. Okay. You have unknown male DNA found on a glove outside the home. Would you not wear gloves during a quadruple passing? I mean, the state has real problems within their story. Let's all stop acting as if this is an open and shut case. I'm tired of hearing it. And if what we're believing Dylan said to be true when that she heard people running up and down the stairs at a time when nobody should be running up and down the stairs, then wouldn't that mean there was more than one suspect? I mean, I'm not an investigator or an attorney. I'm just asking the questions. To me, it sounds as if she is saying there's more than one suspect here because I'm hearing people run up and down the stairs. We have two unidentified sources of DNA that are not skin cells found in the home. At this particular point, the only thing I know for sure is that nobody talking about this story really knows for sure what happened. The mainstream media is way off. We're all way off making videos on it. These hearings need to be open because we need the truth out there. And if the truth is out there, maybe that can put a whole lot of this stuff to bed and everybody can say, okay, this is the suspect or this guy isn't the suspect. Why are we wasting time on these hearings when obviously this other person's the suspect? I mean, we have all these unknowns. I mean, nothing within this story makes sense. Law enforcement finds DNA on a sheath that is presumed to be skin cells, and then they jump through hoops going into databases they shouldn't have accessed just to figure out who it belonged to. While on the other hand, they have two other types of DNA that are more fitting to a crime scene, and we're just not looking at that. I mean, whoever that DNA belonged to, that's perfectly okay. That's absolutely normal to find in a quadruple passing. We're not going to worry about the human DNA found on the rail and on the glove. None of that lines up.
She wasn't given a chance to ask any of those questions. She didn't know that Bryan's car, and the court's question, good question, what does that mean? Could it mean there's more than one person? The answer to that is, or it could mean it's not Bryan because his car's got nothing in it and there were only 13 minutes to do this. The magistrate didn't get to know that.
In fact, his DNA is still on the knife sheath, though. That's the problem, counsel.
Yes, that is a problem for probable cause purposes. But Dylan's statement is huge. It may very well be she's the only one trying to tell the truth in this story. A lot of us have been wondering about her credibility in saying she was lying. Well, as it turns out, she wasn't lying. As it turns out, she's the only one telling the truth here. She's telling law enforcement, I have no idea what was going on. I had a lot to drink the night before. A lot of this is fuzzy. And by the way, I'm hearing people run up and down stairs when there shouldn't have been people running up and down stairs. I had also heard something to the effect of she told law enforcement this potential suspect was a little bit taller than her. She's like 5'8" or 5'9", or something to that effect, but somehow it's gotten twisted that the suspect was 6 feet or taller. The more hearings we have, the more questions we have. Who else was in that home? Who is the unidentified male DNA? If you want to get the conviction, if y'all people who believe Bryan Kohberger is guilty really want your conviction to prove that he did it so you can rub it in all of our faces, you all need to be beating down doors to figure out who that unidentified male DNA belonged to. That's just a fact. Because that is loads of reasonable doubt right now. When you are in a struggle, you aren't going to necessarily just leave behind skin cells. You're going to leave behind some type of bodily fluid. That's two different sources of bodily fluid. And they don't belong to the same person. So Dylan was right. And everybody else is wrong. At least that's how I'm seeing it. If you see it differently, you can let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, a more fair, open conversation, maybe check one of these videos out. Y'all be safe now.